Well, you might simplistically say I'm of Anglo-Saxon origin. Saxon as the sort of Germanic influence, which is actually Persian Scythian influence. But Persia was, like many societies, not really united, especially as regards the Scythian group. They were neither Mede nor Persian, really. And they were so uncentralized, you could say uncivilized, in some ways. Horsemen, family, tribal, nomadic, not centralized as a culture, and therefore able to spread anywhere. I mean, you think of Kiwis as having the wanderlust, got to do the overseas experience in their youth. Scythians fundamentally like that. And it's that influence, you see, when we say Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldees and so on. Yes, but incredible influence of the Scythian if you're a bit of a rebel, really. I mean, someone who leaves there. And perhaps he was driven out, but he seems to have been driven out with his family, not just flung out, if you know what I mean. He chose to go. And it's this incredible independence that these people had, which made them, they never really got totally assimilated into what we might think of broadly as Persia. I mean, invaluable, of course, tremendous fighters and so on. They are that Northern Europe influence of, they'll cope with the cold, they'll cope with change, they'll fight their way through. An intense confidence from the sort of upbringing they have, which is an ability for the family to manage without civilization. We might call it sub-tribal, not even tribal, Yes. So when I imagine myself to be, well, for instance, female in the dream, or see myself as female in some context, that's meaningful to my, if you like, spiritual heritage, in the spiritual DNA, so to speak, my background. I'm drawn to a Saxon type culture, which of course is drawn to a Hebrew type family view of things. That's what the ancient Hebrew influence is too. It's the Persian, not the Persian, the Scythian, more than other cultures, you see. And sure, there's other complications for the Hebrew people in that they are in fact a small nation, and they're between these giant civilizations on either side, be they Hittite or Persian or Egyptian or what have you, So I come into that heritage, and if you like, they're more of the non-conforming rebel, the first people to, as far as we know, to have, for the men to wear trousers, because they were horsemen. And the horse is mobility, and mobility is not so easy to control. You don't know where he is now and where he's going to be, and they were not something that could be easily used by civilization, except invaluable in war. And when we think of Vikings and so on, okay, we've just changed one form of transport for another. We're on ships. And we're not just going, across the northern Atlantic and North America, and Iceland, Greenland and so on. We're going down through those rivers, right down to the Black Sea and into the Mediterranean, and we're a menace. The sea people, I suspect, are much influenced by that sort of Viking, Norse, Scythian heritage. So, in the dream, Marshall has red hair. Of course, Mum has red hair. He's a woman. Why? Because he's been devoted to his mum. That's what he has idolized in his youth, in his childhood. And no doubt because of some long spiritual experience pre this life here. Let me pause. But let me say thank you, Dad, too. Thank you, Heavenly Father. I might say that the interest in bows and arrows and that is the Scythian again. He had to be good with the bow and arrow on horseback. This was part of his... And I think the other thing was his integrity. You could utterly rely on him. Which, of course, in a family structure, you can utterly rely on. From the point of view of civilization, no, they're devoted to their family situation, not to some artificial mass blanket cultural entity called civilization. And of course, if you think of it, the real strength of the Scythian was his use of the bow on horseback. Horseback alone is not good enough. It's actually the bow and arrow. And you get, of course, the Anglo-Saxon in medieval times as the longbowman. He may not have a horse, but he has the longbow, and that's far more effective in speed of firepower and adaptability to the whole population for war. And the English longbowman was, of course, the terror, in effect, of European warfare. Artillery on a magnificent scale, you see. I mean, it's simply, why is the European so successful on the world stage as we move through from medieval to present day? It's been because his warring ability. Not so much his ability to build civilization, but his ability to destroy others. And now it's the use of missiles, of course, which is the next stage on, wasn't it? What crosses my mind still is that trousers are that evidence of the importance of the horse to the Scythian. Changed his way of dress to breeches. In Europe, it was the male image. In the Pacific, it wasn't. Real men wear skirts, says the Samoan. When you've seen how they're built, you can believe it. But to get back to the dream is effective only if it speaks in the language of the person you wish to have the dream, you wish to communicate to. So it's in those sort of picture language to Marshall. I'd like to say in passing too that this European input that's populated North America, it's the individualism, the staggering American confidence to cope with what is actually new to them and amazes the onlooker in the world. I don't mean courageous in the military sense now. I mean like the sort of person who could be migrant and then him or his children become steel workers, putting up those early skyscrapers and so on. I mean, what to civilized man seems a utter recklessness that you would only do in the in sheer desperation of poverty. And of course, that frontier new world cultural milieu is consistent with needing that sort of character. You could say it forms that character, or you could say that only that character can really take it on. You know, the migrant needs an incredible amount of risk-taking, drive, and even then probably a massive push to make him do it. The rest stay behind. But he didn't, and he forged a new life in the new world. This individualism then is unfortunately competitive and warring, and you know, when the Romans gave up, then in the end the British took over empire building, and when they gave up, the Americans stepped in, and they're the current decaying world empire, perhaps. Not sure. What crosses my mind, though, is that the one that replaces America will still be of this sort of line. I don't see the next dominant power, if there is a dominant power, world power, as being other than, right back in our ancient history, this Scythian strain that we put down to the Hebrew sort of influence on our culture, but really came from Persia. And not Persia at that, but particularly Scythian. But that in its turn was probably a consequence of this nomadic existence at the steppes of Central Asia, the Mongolian people, you know, we get the hordes sweeping across down to Rome, Genghis Khan, and so on. It's that again, isn't it? I have a friend who I don't see very often. She's married to a Maori, but she herself is Mongolian. I realised how incredible her childhood was, living on the grasslands, nomadic. When you ran out of grass, you upped and moved your family to where you could find pasture. An astonishingly robust way of life. Else you don't survive. In short, they're the great survivors. And you could say that this ability to survive has been to the detriment of the other nations that have been overpowered by them down the ages, now on a world stage, of course, and so on. And what we in cultural Europe of the 20th and 21st century have assumed to be inherent in our stock is in fact this astonishing ability of the nomad of Asia. Well, thank you, Heavenly Dad. But to get back to the recording just before this, the dream, the auburn-haired lady, myself, I think it's just the language it has to be put in, the imagery that it has to be put in, to speak to me of our eternal self as compared to whatever transitory experience we may be running in the universe of the transitory at the moment. But it speaks to me of how fantastic our personhood is in the eternal realm of what we would think of in terms of heaven being, a state of being, and understood, birthed in this state of transitory being that we experience in this universe of the transitory, that we may be a living eternity, a fullness of life, life abundant, possibly still an eternal becoming, as God may indeed be too, change from glory into glory, ever new, ever greater, ever expanding, exponentially, 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 but safely so for all concerned. This complete, perfect, eternal fellowship. And when I say complete, I don't mean therefore limiting its future to simply what is now in a time context, but ever evolving, but safely so. And perhaps we come here to this universe of the transitory for lessons from time to time, for booster courses, top-ups, in-service training. Oh, I think he needs another dousing of being down on earth and comparing good and evil and getting his bearings. And so in a very limited capacity, we're stripped of our majestic heavenly faculties, that we might focus for a little while on a very important lesson for the sake of eternity and the good of all. Love you, Dad. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.